Hello, friends. Starting this July, two important developments are drawing attention to the future of Social Security, and many people are not connecting them. Neither one is likely to dominate the evening news, and neither is something the Social Security Administration or your bank is going to call you about. But both developments emerged within the last week, and both could affect millions of Americans who rely on Social Security. The first comes from a government report released on June 9th. The second comes from inflation data released on June 13th. Together, they highlight two realities: the long-term financial challenges facing Social Security and the way current inflation trends may influence future benefit increases. Let's break both down in plain language and discuss what they could mean for retirees. The first issue comes from a document that most Americans never read: the annual report from the Social Security and Medicare trustees. Each year, the trustees review the program's finances and estimate how long the trust funds can continue paying full scheduled benefits. Think of it as an annual checkup for Social Security. In the report released on June 9th, the trustees projected that the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund would be depleted in 2032. Last year's report had projected depletion in 2033, meaning the estimated date has moved slightly closer. That does not mean Social Security is going bankrupt, and it certainly does not mean checks will suddenly stop. Even if the trust fund reserves were exhausted, payroll taxes paid by current workers would continue to finance much of the program. According to the trustees, incoming revenue would be sufficient to cover roughly 78% of scheduled benefits. Unless Congress acts before then, current law would require benefits to be reduced to match available revenue. To understand what that could mean, consider someone receiving the average monthly retirement benefit of about $2,081. A reduction of approximately 22% would lower that benefit to around $1,623. Someone receiving $1,500 per month would see a reduction of about $330, while a $2,500 monthly benefit would decline by about $550. These figures illustrate why many policy experts, advocacy organizations, and lawmakers continue to call for reforms well before the projected depletion date. One point that has received attention is that changes in tax policy affecting Social Security benefits can influence the program's finances. Because taxes paid on some Social Security benefits are credited back to the trust funds, any reduction in those tax revenues could affect the system's long-term outlook. However, the trustees cite multiple factors behind the revised projection, including demographic trends and overall program finances, so no single factor should be viewed as the sole cause. Organizations such as AARP have urged Congress to address the issue sooner rather than later, arguing that delaying action could make future solutions more difficult. But here is the most important takeaway: nothing changes this week, this month, or this year. Under current projections, Social Security benefits remain fully payable through 2032. There is no immediate crisis for today's beneficiaries, and anyone urging panic or drastic financial decisions based on these reports is not giving you the full picture. The long-term challenges are real, but they are also well known. Congress has addressed Social Security financing issues before, and many experts believe lawmakers still have time to act before any automatic reductions would take effect. What this report really gives you is perspective in two important ways. First, the political conversation. Over the next few years, you are going to hear Social Security reform discussed in almost every election cycle. The key point is that there is now a clear baseline behind all of that debate. If no changes are made, projections show the system would be able to pay only a portion of scheduled benefits after the trust fund is depleted, with estimates generally in the range of roughly 3/4 of promised payments coming from ongoing payroll taxes. That does not mean the program stops. It means benefits would need to be adjusted to match incoming revenue unless Congress acts. Understanding that baseline helps you evaluate any proposed policy more realistically without the fear-based framing that often surrounds the topic. Second, for people deciding when to claim benefits, this is part of the bigger financial picture. Claiming earlier locks in a lower monthly benefit under current rules. Waiting longer increases the monthly amount, with the maximum reached at age 70. Those are the standard trade-offs. What matters in this context is not panic about timing, but awareness that long-term program adjustments are still a policy decision Congress has not finalized. So the right choice is not universal. It depends on your health, savings, other income sources, and risk tolerance. Now, the second issue people often miss is how the annual cost of living adjustment, COLA, is actually determined. The COLA is not based on the full year's inflation. Instead, it is based on price changes during a specific 3-month window, July, August, and September, using a federal inflation index. That means the inflation experienced during this summer directly influences the benefit adjustment for the following year. The official COLA is not finalized until October, once those 3 months are measured together. Recent inflation readings show that prices remain elevated in some categories, especially essentials like housing, food, and energy. Some private analysts and advocacy groups have offered early estimates for next year's COLA, but those projections vary and will likely change as more data comes in over the summer. The important takeaway is not the exact percentage, but the relationship. Higher inflation can lead to a larger COLA, but that adjustment reflects past price increases rather than preventing them in real time. In other words, benefits may rise, but so can the cost of living those benefits are meant to cover. Here is a simple example of how that gap can appear. If a retiree receives a monthly benefit and inflation raises their everyday expenses faster than their annual COLA increase, they can still experience a shortfall even in a year with a raise. This is because prices change continuously, while COLA adjustments arrive only once a year. That gap can feel especially significant for people who rely heavily or entirely on Social Security for income, since they have limited flexibility to absorb rising costs. So what should you actually do with this information? First, avoid making financial decisions based on early COLA estimates. The official figure will not be set until the fall, and projections can shift significantly before then. Second, focus less on the headline percentage and more on your personal budget. If possible, plan for ongoing price increases rather than assuming your annual adjustment will fully offset them. And third, if you are preparing for retirement decisions, treat Social Security as one part of a broader income strategy rather than your only buffer against rising costs. To bring it all together, the latest trustees' projections continue to show long-term funding pressure for Social Security unless changes are made, and current inflation trends are influencing both today's costs and tomorrow's benefit adjustments. But none of this changes anything overnight. The system continues to pay benefits under current law, and policymakers still have time to make adjustments before automatic changes would be triggered. The key is understanding the facts clearly so you can make decisions based on reality, not headlines or fear. To understand why these two issues matter together, it helps to zoom out a bit and look at how Social Security actually fits into a retiree's financial life over time, not just month to month. Social Security is designed as a foundation, not a complete income system. For some people, especially those with pensions or savings, it plays a supporting role. For others, it becomes the primary or even only source of income. That difference is what makes the same policy discussion feel very different depending on who is listening. When analysts talk about long-term funding projections, they are not describing an immediate shutdown or interruption of payments. They are describing a mismatch between scheduled benefits and projected revenue under current law. That distinction matters because it shifts the conversation from fear to policy. If changes are made in advance, they can be gradual. If changes are delayed, they tend to become more abrupt. That is the core tension behind most Social Security debates in Washington. Historically, Congress has adjusted the system multiple times, changing tax rates, benefit formulas, and eligibility rules. So when people say something has to be done, it is not a prediction of collapse, but a recognition that the current structure does not fully balance long-term inflows and outflows under existing assumptions. Now, bringing this back to individual decisions, one of the most misunderstood areas is the idea of timing Social Security. People often treat the decision as a simple break-even calculation: take early and get more years of smaller checks, or wait and get fewer years of larger checks. But in reality, it is more complex than that. Your claiming age interacts with several real-world variables: your health status and family longevity history, your ability to work part-time or full-time, your savings and withdrawal strategy, and your tolerance for policy uncertainty. For example, someone with limited savings might prioritize earlier income simply for stability, even if it means a lower lifetime benefit. Another person with sufficient retirement savings might delay benefits to increase guaranteed income later in life, reducing reliance on investments. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong. The key point is that Social Security claiming is less about maximizing a formula and more about managing risk over time. That risk component is also why discussions about long-term projections get so much attention. Even small changes in assumptions like retirement age trends or wage growth can shift estimates over time. That is why trustees' reports are updated annually rather than treated as fixed forecasts. Now, turning back to inflation and cost of living adjustments, it is important to understand what COLA does and what it does not do. COLA is designed to preserve purchasing power over time, not to increase real income. In theory, if it worked perfectly, your benefit would buy roughly the same basket of goods each year. In practice, it is an estimate based on a specific inflation index and a specific time window. That means it can lag behind actual personal expenses, especially because retirees do not spend money the same way as the general population used in the index calculation. For example, healthcare and housing often represent a larger share of retiree spending than they do in the general inflation basket. If those categories rise faster than average, retirees may feel pressure even in years when the official COLA looks strong on paper. This is one reason why two people receiving the same percentage increase can experience it very differently. One person's expenses may align closely with the index, while another's may not. It is also important to understand timing. COLA increases are applied once per year, while prices change continuously. That creates a natural lag. Even in a high COLA year, households may still feel financial strain in the months before the adjustment takes effect. This is why some financial planners emphasize budgeting based on current expenses rather than expected adjustments. The adjustment is reactive, not proactive. Another layer that often gets overlooked is how fixed income interacts with inflation over multiple years. A single year of higher inflation can be manageable. But when inflation stays elevated over a longer period, even moderate gaps between income growth and cost growth can compound. That compounding effect is what creates long-term pressure for people on fixed incomes. For someone relying heavily on Social Security, the key financial challenge is not one specific year. It is the cumulative effect of small mismatches between income adjustments and real-world expenses over time. That is also why many retirement strategies emphasize diversification of income sources where possible. Even modest supplemental income, part-time work, savings withdrawals, or other benefits can reduce sensitivity to inflation timing and policy changes. From a planning perspective, there are a few grounded principles that tend to matter more than reacting to any single report or estimate. First, avoid making major financial decisions based on short-term projections. Whether it is inflation forecasts or early COLA estimates, these numbers change as new data comes in. Second, focus on flexibility. Households that can adjust spending slightly in response to cost changes tend to handle inflation cycles more smoothly than those operating at a fixed, unchangeable budget limit. Third, treat Social Security as a stable but not fully self-sufficient income source when possible. The more it is relied upon as the only layer of income, the more sensitive a household becomes to policy and inflation shifts. Finally, keep perspective on timing. The issues discussed in trustees' reports and inflation data are long-range signals, not immediate triggers. They are meant to inform planning over years, not drive reactions over days or weeks. So when you bring both topics together, the long-term funding outlook and the short-term inflation effect, the real takeaway is not urgency, but awareness. One shows how the system is expected to function over decades under current law. The other shows how purchasing power shifts within a single year. Neither is a reason for panic, but both are reasons to pay attention. Understand the mechanics and make decisions based on a clear view of how the system actually works, rather than how it is often described in headlines or social media clips. In the end, the most valuable position is not reacting emotionally to each update, but understanding the structure behind them well enough to adjust calmly when real policy changes eventually arrive.